Better if we have translation or not?
Not for me.
No, not for a while.
Not for anybody, Ambassador, as far as we concerned.
Okay, perfect.
In English is okay.
Easier.
In English is okay.
Okay, thank you very much all for coming. This is an event that we've now been doing for the last 3 years on this very special and difficult day for us. This is now a national commemoration for us for the last 3 years, because as you well know, 3 years ago we had failed, thank God, coup attempt in Turkey on the evening of the 15th of July in 2006. Some people who had infiltrated the state apparatus proceeded to use the means at their disposal to try to overthrow a democratically elected government. This coup attempt was planned and organized and executed by the FETÖ terrorist organization, which still continues, unfortunately, its operations to this day. At that night, during that night, elements within the Turkish army, acting outside of the command chain of the army, essentially proceeded to try to overthrow the government, the democratically elected old government. They tried to assassinate the president at the time. They tried to assassinate other leaders of government. They bombed important institutions, including the headquarters of the military, the headquarters of the police security apparatus, and most importantly, of course, the presidency and the parliament. The parliament being bombed, of course, was something that had never happened in our past. I mean, the other institutions had not been bombed either, but the symbolic importance of the parliament cannot be overstated, because, of course, it is the representation of the people's will and the sovereignty of the nation. Other than the bombing, helicopters took to the skies, tried to shoot fire on indiscriminately civilians, and ultimately killed 250 people, injuring thousands others. This coup attempt failed for one reason and one reason only. It was because the Turkish people, when they realized that there were some forces outside of the system trying to overthrow the government, they took to the streets and essentially said no to this coup attempt. They demonstrated on the streets, they took to the main boulevards in all of the major cities, and then went to all of these important institutions to essentially protect their institutions against this treacherous coup attempt. During the night this continued, but the people did not go home. They continued to demonstrate. They risked their lives, showed their courage. Some of them actually laid down on the floor in front of tanks to prevent these forces from essentially taking over the government. Sorry. It has now been 3 years, like I said, since this terrible coup attempt. This was arguably the largest terrorist attack in Turkish history, and it still continues, of course, to be a major trauma. But Turkey is recovering from this trauma, and Turkey is normalizing. Of course, our efforts to push back against this terror organization, this FETÖ organization that is led by this so-called cleric Fethullah Gülen, continues. This is an organization that started its activities in the 1970s. They set up schools, they set up shell companies, they set up different media organizations, and the whole aim throughout the decades was to infiltrate the government, was to infiltrate different power bases within the country. Ultimately, as we found out on the evening of the 15th of July in 2016, to overthrow the government and put in place a different kind of regime, a regime that would be different from the democratic, secular state based on rule of law, the republic that we have today. Fortunately, over the past 3 years, in working in different dimensions, we have been successful in trying to eliminate this threat to a large degree. We have first and foremost proceeded with, of course, judicial activities to bring all of the perpetrators of the coup attempt to justice, starting with, of course, indictments and then court cases. There are now hundreds of different court cases against these groups of individuals who tried to overthrow the government. Secondly, of course, we have worked to eliminate some of these shell companies, whether it be in media, in education, in different sectors of the economy, so that they would not be able to use these different organizations to try to undermine the democratic government. Thirdly, what we have done, of course, is we have tried to address the problem that exists because of the existence of this organization in other countries as well. The FETÖ organization has its power base in the United States, but also, of course, has a lot of different representations throughout the world, including in a lot of countries in Latin America, in Europe, and in Africa. So we have started the conversation to try to explain to all friendly and other governments that this FETÖ organization is a threat not only to the Turkish Republic and the Turkish democracy, but it is also a threat to the countries that they are based in, because their goal is not just to peacefully educate or do sort of interfaith activities, which is how they present themselves, but it is also to indoctrinate people, to indoctrinate young people, to radicalize them, and then in the future to use them use them for their own dark intentions. So we have been continuing with these activities all over the world, through embassies, through dialogue with friendly governments among different organizations, hopefully to marginalize and weaken this organization as much as possible so that they will no longer constitute a threat to the Turkish Republic. I think we've made a lot of progress. Well, of course, we have been very careful in trying to pursue this path within the democratic realm, because whatever you do, it has to be based on the rule of law. It has to be based on fundamental freedoms and human rights. In Turkey, for example, a lot of judicial proceedings are ongoing because, of course, all of the people who are suspect in this process have the right to defend themselves, have the right to clear their names. And other mechanisms have also been set up outside of the judicial proceedings for those who have been subject to administrative proceedings, so that they can actually argue their case and say, for example, that they were wrongfully implicated in a proceeding, administrative proceeding, so that they can be returned to their previous positions. And that process has been ongoing as well, so that while we are trying to eliminate this threat to our state, to our democracy, to our republic, at the same time we are not wrongfully accusing anybody of anything that they did not do. So this is a process, of course, that is ongoing. It's not an easy process because this organization took decades to infiltrate secretly within the government, within state institutions, whether it be the military, the intelligence, the police forces, the judicial ministry, the justice ministry, and also, of course, the foreign ministry. My own ministry was a victim of this infiltration as well, and it's not very easy to continue with the process of making sure that these people are distanced from critical government institutions, because you have to make sure that no one, like I said, is charged wrongfully. So 3 years after the coup attempt, we are still working towards eliminating the threat, whether internally or externally. I think we've made a lot of progress, but the work continues. We recognize that this will be a long-term struggle, because of course, as you all appreciate, this is not the only difficulty that Turkey is faced with. We are in a very difficult region. We have a border with Syria, we have a border with Iraq, we have a border with Iran. To the north, we have our neighbor Russia, and of course the Palestinian issue, all sorts of radicalization, the Islamic State, the PKK and YPG, terrorist organizations in Syria and Iraq still continue to target Turkey. So this is not the only threat that we are struggling with. But I have to say, in looking back over the past 3-4 years, despite all of the threats, despite all of the attacks that we have encountered, the Turkish state, the Turkish democracy, and the Turkish people have been successful in keeping their country strong. If you look at the past 2 to 2.5 years, we have not had one major incident of terror attack or any other major incident. I think this is very important. When you look at the economy, when you look at tourism, when you look at all of the major indicators, they are strong. This means that we are doing a good job in normalizing the country, even after being subjected to such a traumatic experience. But of course, the work continues. It's not easy. Every other day, we have other difficulties in our region that we must confront with. Unfortunately, when you are in government in Turkey or in the state apparatus, every morning you wake up to another development. You can't ever go to work thinking, what can I do today to make things better 5 years, 10 years down the line? Because you're constantly, of course, having to react to different things that are happening. But nonetheless, I think we are in a very good place. I can't say that everything is perfect. I wish I could. But in our geography, you have to deal with the problems and you have to plan for the future at the same time. So I will stop there. The goal, of course, was to remind everyone and explain the trauma that we experienced. It is a unique one. It is not very easy to understand, I know, because such an organization really is unique. It doesn't exist anywhere else. An organization that started with schools and then grew not only in Turkey but globally to create different organizations in private sector, in the media, and in other sectors of power within any other country, and then used all of these as they infiltrated the state structure, used all of these together to increase its power base. And when it realized that it couldn't gain power through this alone, then used its elements within the armed forces to try to forcefully overthrow a democratically elected government. It's really very unique. There are maybe some parallels in different ways, but there is no other organization anywhere in the world such as this. And of course, they continue their activities primarily in the United States. That is where they have their power base. We know globally that a lot of countries are actively monitoring and investigating this organization. We know that some of our allies in particular are conducting detailed investigations into this organization, because of course they are doing a lot of illegal activities in all of the countries that they are in, from visa irregularities, from human trafficking to irregular bid processes. For example, they will set up a school, and then if they need to do some construction, they will get some of their own people to set up a construction company, and then they will go for an unlawful bid, get that company to get the construction bid, and have the government pay for that construction. So this is the way in which they operate. They will bring teachers using visa irregularities. Then they will force those teachers to pay back to the organization through their wages. So there's many different ways in which they operate as essentially organized crime. But of course, it takes time to bring to light all of these activities. And this is what we are also trying to do with friendly governments. We're trying to explain to them how these companies, these schools, and these activities actually undermine the legal system of the countries that they are in as well. So it's an ongoing process. It's not easy to explain, but we will continue with our friends to try to explain this threat. One, so that they don't try to do another coup attempt in Turkey, of course, which would be unimaginable, but this is what they want to do. And two, also to remind everybody else that there is such a threat, because With terror organizations, you always have to remember that if they cannot attack the primary target that they want to attack, then they will attack other targets to gain attention. So in the end, this is a continuing threat that exists globally, and it has to be addressed globally as well. So I'll stop there, and I'm happy to take any questions.